The layoffs have begun at CNN due to a cost-cutting strategy by parent company Warner Brothers Discovery. CNN CEO Chris Licht said in a memo today that it is a difficult time for everyone. He added, "Our people are at the heart and soul of this organization. It is incredibly hard to say goodbye to any one member of the CNN team, much less many. I recently described this process as a gut punch because I know that's how it feels for all of us."
But say goodbye they will, it sounds like.
Yeah, I don't know how much those corporate platitudes are going to go over with the people who actually have lost their jobs. The question is this going to be like the pattern we've seen across many industries where to save money, they cut costs, but it doesn't necessarily inure to the benefit of the company in terms of the product that they're actually putting out there? Is the issue a staffing issue, or is it that CNN isn't making content that people want to watch?
Or is it an issue like Twitter is maybe demonstrating, which you can fire massive amounts of people and still run the company? It's what I think they're demonstrating.
That story hasn't quite been concluded yet.
All right, we won't talk. Sorry to make us talk about Twitter for the 40th time today.
Yeah.
We'll stick with CNN. Obviously their issue was programming. It was content-based. Was the viewpoints of the journalists. And I think I saw Don Lemon on one of the late shows very recently, maybe as recently as last night. I'm saying that I didn't watch it live. Obviously, I saw a clip later. Him saying
which is the problem, which is what CNN is going through right now.
Well, I watch it live, and he was. The question was, is CNN flailing because its personalities are deemed or judged to be viewed to be too liberal? And Don Lemon says, "I don't think we're too liberal. We're just journalists. We're just doing our job." And you rolled your eyes at that, which is audiences are rolling their eyes at that. People have moved away.
Look, Don Lemon, there was a time when I will admit to have being a fan. I love his.
I'm not a fan.
His New Year's Eve specials. It's choice. It's peak television when he and Anderson Cooper have a couple of cocktails and ring in the New Year. But it is so narrow-minded to think that he is anything but a screaming liberal. Yeah. So much so that he catches the ire of leftists constantly, probably as much as he is irritating conservatives across the board. I don't understand how these people aren't self-aware. I know that I'm a leftist. I know before I say something what the reaction is going to be in front of different audiences, and sometimes calibrate accordingly. The fact that he has such blindness about his own political position and how he's coming off in the world is exactly what's wrong with not just CNN, but a lot of these media institutions. Yeah,
definitely. They did they did promote someone who I think is a pretty good person. Their White House correspondent, Phil Mattingly, so he's going to be their main White House correspondent now. He's a pretty good journalist. Okay. There are good journalists at CNN. I enjoy a lot of their content. Yeah. I think some of their election content was very good.
I was going to say, midterm night, I found myself coming back to CNN over and over.
I think they get it more than MSNBC does, actually, right now, for certain.
Speaking of.
Meanwhile, over at MSNBC, Joy Ann Reid had this to say about white nationalist Nick Fuentes' meeting with former President Donald Trump.
Some people come out and say, well, that's horrible, and say he's a terrible person. They don't want to talk about Trump. They say, but Trump's not an anti-Semite. They carve out of that. Trump's not a bad guy. He shouldn't have had him at the table. But the problem is the rest of what Fuentes just said. To me, that doesn't sound any different than fundamentally what the party platform is. They don't believe in elections. They don't necessarily like the idea of democracy. Mike Lee said democracy is a bad idea. They don't like the idea of women controlling their bodies. They clearly wouldn't mind having a dictator because they don't think that elections matter. They think they should just decide who the president of the United States is. They hate the culture. They're angry that the culture is too friendly to LGBTQ people. I see a very small degree of difference between what he believes and what they believe.
Now, all of the things that she listed were, things that, Republicans support. And, obviously her characterizations are what they are. But those are fine critiques to make of the Republican Party. That's not why people are mad at Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is a Holocaust-denying, inward-saying white supremacist. Even like conservatives who might dance around words like white supremacist and racist sometimes are openly disavowing and pushing themselves away from because they know that there's nothing to defend there at all.
People of Fuentes' ilk believe that Jewish people are inferior because of the structure of their bones.
They're doing physiognomy.
It's different. That's not Trump does not believe that. You can make whatever criticisms you want. That is not a mainstream view in the Republican Party. Sorry, there is huge difference between Trump and the Republican Party and what Nick Fuentes represents, which is why he's being roundly criticized.
Right.
And Republican figure after Republican figure saying you should not break bread with Nick Fuentes, who doesn't. He represents genuinely racist, genuinely Holocaust-denying people at the very fringe of political thought. There's not a lot of them. This is not a movement that has any strength or relevance. It is solely one person who has successfully attached himself to Kanye West. Well done. I
mean, look, I do think that you can't say that the movement has absolutely no energy. Charlottesville wasn't that long ago. Nick Fuentes was there and associating with those groups. I mean, that's part of why people are so angry about him having sat down with President Trump. So you can make your claim, and I understand why Democrats and politicians would want to try to tie and make more of the relationship between Nick Fuentes and Trump because it looks bad. And I think that there is definitely a criticism that says, Donald Trump, what is going on with you and your handlers that you would end up in this kind of situation? And why is it that the friends of your friends, why is it that the people you're hanging out with, even if your intention was only to meet with Kanye West, why are they surrounded by people who are so nefarious and who have such abhorrent views? Fine, make that argument. But to pretend that there's no space between Nick Fuentes and your average Republican, I think it undermines the credibility of the interlocutor, and it undermines the credibility of Democrats who do try to make everybody into the worst version of some kind of like MAGA Republican
stereotype.
stereotype.
Reid's the worst version of this because she truly doesn't. I believe that she doesn't understand the difference between Nick Fuentes.
She doesn't have any intellectual curiosity about what's going on the right. And I don't know. I feel like I don't expect your average person to be following conservative news outlets and watching Fox and reading Breitbart and exposing herself to what's going on in the world. But it very much is her job. And
and she was, you know who that other guest is? That's Kurt Bardella, who came from the right, became like a never Trump person and is now just a fully absorbed kind of, MSNBC figure. But he came from, he was a publicist at Breitbart.
Oh, really?
So that's what his job was.
Insane.
So he understands. And he's also the guy, by the way, he's the Lauren Boebert OnlyFans, #1 subscriber, if you remember that.
Okay, so let me see if I got this straight. MSNBC is basically the #1 rehabilitation mechanism for conservatives who had all of the views that she just articulated that she said were so reprehensible, right? Election denying, blah, 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 doesn't respect LGBT people, all of the whole 9 yards. And she's sitting there with someone who was a proud member of that party, apparently until recently, or maybe still is a Republican, but isn't a MAGA Republican, whatever that means, and has the audacity to say that it's other people are the problem and not her and her own networks having the effect of taking person after person, Bush's former Congresswoman, Nicole Wallace, and making them the stars of their own network.
Yep.
As a leftist, this is what's really frustrating to me, because with all of the conversation about liberal bias in media, which totally exists, the thing that I think people have appetite for, which is genuine populism on the right and the left, is completely excluded. And leftists, she will sit down with a person like that long before she sits down with anybody who ever voted for Bernie Sanders.
Wow, he did too. I was Googling Kurt Bardella to make sure I had that origin right. I did have it right. He did an op-ed for USA Today. I worked for Republicans and Breitbart. Trump made me see the light. And then a few weeks later, I used to work at Breitbart. Here's why I think they fired. He did a couple of these, not just one.
God, it's look.
Yeah.
I don't like to use the word grift. It's thrown around a little bit too much. So let me choose a different word. The power structure validates a very narrow span of political worldview. And it's not about it being left or right. It's this status quo establishment enshrining view of the world where it's all about respecting norms. Everything has to go around as clockwork. We just have to maintain the system that benefits people like these and the people who go on these shows and excludes the majority of Americans from the alleged American dream. And that's what we're seeing here.
And you can be a former Republican or even former person associated with a very conservative news website and then change your views or find Trump odious, and that describes me to some degree.
Sure.
And it describes people like Alyssa Farah Griffin, who I think is doing a pretty good job trying to educate her co-hosts at The View and at CNN.
And they're so dismissive of her, though.
She does a good job, I think, of explaining. She's been inside the administration, and she can speak for. And they exist a lot of Republicans who do want to move on from Trump for both practical and moral and constitutional for a bunch of reasons, and she does that well without going the full route of sitting there and pretending that there's no difference between Nick Fuentes and Donald Trump.
But what this thing, it just occurred to me, what's wrong with what Joy and Reid is doing here, what it exposes is that she doesn't actually care. All of those things that she described as being Republican priorities that she attributed to Nick Fuentes, so that's why people are mad at him, those are still the priorities of all of the Never Trump Republicans, but she doesn't care. What the real issue is the vibes. They don't like the vibes that Trump has. They don't like the disrespect for decorum and the rules. And it's all optics. It's so superficial. And to be so self-righteous about something that isn't even substantive, it's gross. It's really disgusting. And if these institutions, if these media organizations would understand why so many people are turning it off and only watching it in clip form on YouTube the next day, there's a hint.
I should look in the mirror. More Rising right after this.